The sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows across the sprawling fields of Willow Creek Ranch. The air was thick with the sweet scent of hay and the fading warmth of the day. Amid this serenity, an unsettling stillness lingered, something never felt before on these lands. Then it happened, a sound echoing against the calmness. The heavy thud of boots approached slowly but intentionally. An unmistakable rustle muffled the chirping of crickets, as if the world itself held its breath, sensing something dark and foreboding. From the tree line emerged a gang of masked figures, their eyes obscured under dark coverings, with blurs of black and gray reflecting the dimming sun. These weren't your ordinary trespassers. They were prowlers, a band of misfits with adrenaline pulsing through their veins and mischief glinting in their eyes. They moved like phantoms with a singular purpose, to stake their claim on something they did not own. At the heart of the chaos was Old Man Bill, the rancher. With a back bent by decades of hard labor and hands roughened by the elements, he stood sentinel on his land, unaware of the storm brewing at the edge of his property. He scratched the back of his head absent-mindedly as he admired the sunset, the elastic bands of worry unspooling in his mind. Old Man Bill was a guardian of more than just the crops. He was the heart of this land. As the gang crept closer, their breath visible in the evening chill, they exchanged hushed murmurs, plotting their next move. But Old Man Bill had lived long enough to recognize shadows from a distance. He felt it, the shivers of an intruder's approach. A primal instinct stirred within him, one honed by years of defending his home against storms, droughts, and now unwelcome visitors. He turned his gaze toward his barn, the sturdy silhouette darkening against the twilight. Inside, he had a plan. Not just any plan, but one that was birthed from desperation and a fierce love for his land. The barn was filled with the remnants of a once bustling farm life. Rusty tools, bales of hay, and the old tractor that had seen better days. But it was what lay hidden in the back that made him smirk, a modicum of creativity coupled with his years of experience. Old Man Bill slipped inside, each footstep calculated yet almost silent. He grabbed a weathered wooden box, opening it to reveal an array of flares that still sparkled with potential. Underneath them lay nets, sturdy as they were tangled. To anyone else they were mere tools, but to Bill they symbolized hope. With the daylight fading fast, he stepped out, this time a shadow in his own right. He wasn't standing against invisible threats anymore. He was ready to reclaim his territory. Outside, muffled laughter bubbled forth from the gang, words slurring together in a conspiratorial banter that dripped recklessness. They were emboldened by darkness, blind to the danger lurking close by. Ignorance, as they say, is bliss. But for Bill, it was an opportunity. He lit the flares, their brilliant crimson light slicing through the shadows like a knife. The gang stopped in their tracks, expressions shifting from arrogant bravado to uncertainty as they squinted into the sudden glow. One of them barked, voice dripping with disbelief. Before they could react, Bill threw the nets through the blinding light with all his might. Like a web catching unsuspecting prey, they unfurled, sprawling out to ensnare the gang's feet. Confusion erupted. Yells rang out as the masked figures stumbled, losing their footing, careening into one another like dominoes falling in chaos. Bill shouted, exhilaration filling him. The masked faces twisted with panic. This wasn't just some old farmer they'd underestimated. This was a man who knew his land better than anyone. That connection forged by sweat and blood gave him an upper hand they couldn't fathom. In their desperation, the gang scrambled to free themselves from the nets, a flurry of movement creating a cacophony of frustration. But Bill had already anticipated the next step. He reached into his pocket. A whiff of sandalwood and sage filled his senses, one last ace up his sleeve. A child's toy gun, a relic from when his kids had played cowboy and Indian in the fields. It wasn't real, but the gleam of plastic under the flares was more than enough. He raised it in the air and hollered, "Look, you want this fight?" To the gang, old and weary as he was, it didn't matter if that gun was a toy. All they saw was a man standing strong, defiance etched into every line of his face. They hesitated, perhaps weighing the odds, their bravado faltering against a force they had not anticipated. "Let's split," another yelled, eyes darting, minds racing. They were already retreating, practically tumbling over one another as they tried to disentangle their confused bodies from the nets. Bill shouted, determination surging like wildfire through him. He wasn't done yet. He grabbed another flare and pointed it toward the retreating figures, lighting the night with a burst of color that looked like an explosion. A powerful visual reminder that he would not back down on his land. A few members of the gang managed to break free of the nets and began sprinting toward the tree line, their masks slipping as their composure unraveled. But Old Man Bill wasn't done. His feet found solid ground, moving forward, grounded in his purpose. With that declaration hanging in the air, the last of the gang scrambled away, their pride shattered along with any thought that they could easily claim this ranch. As they disappeared into the darkness, Bill felt a rush of triumph engulf him. He dropped the toy gun to the ground, panting but smiling. It wasn't a fight about possessions. Is it ever truly about that? No, this was a fight over something far more significant: legacy, family, and the roots of one's being. The faint sounds of the crickets resumed, breaking the silence that had enveloped Willow Creek Ranch only minutes before. With the intruders gone, the air felt lighter, safer, filled again with possibilities. Old Man Bill laughed, a deep, hearty belly laugh echoing through the fields and breaking the tension of the moment. Behind him, the beauty of the ranch swelled with colors as the night deepened. Stars began to emerge, twinkling brightly overhead, as if standing in applause of his triumph. He had defended his land using not only tools and strategy, but the deepest part of himself, the love for what he'd built, the hard-won lessons from a lifetime spent working every inch of earth. Looking out over his fields, he thought of his family, the legacy he was building, and the endless fight to cultivate not just crops, but a home, a true refuge. Those masked figures had underestimated more than him. They had underestimated the bond one feels with their land, the unyielding will of a farmer who knows every stone and shadow of what he holds dear. As he walked toward his house, the glow of the flares still illuminating the path behind him, he felt renewed. Old Man Bill was ready for whatever came next, ready to fight again if needed, but more importantly, ready to nurture the life thriving around him. With each step, the rhythm of his heart matched the pulse of the ranch, intertwined in a dance of resilience. The sun had fully set, but for Old Man Bill, the dawn of something new was just beginning. The wind whistled through the fields, rustling the tall grass like whispers from the earth itself. Above, the sun dipped low in an orange and purple sky, painting the ranch in surreal hues. It looked like any other quiet evening on Brookhaven Ranch. But tonight, an invisible storm brewed just beyond the horizon. In the distance, a group of shadowy figures emerged, their silhouettes dark against the brilliant sunset. The air thickened with tension as they approached, marching in a tight formation, their forms half hidden beneath masks that concealed their identities. They were masked, with grim smirks that suggested mischief and menace. Meanwhile, Charlie the rancher was out by the barn, tending to his animals. He hummed an old tune, completely oblivious to the danger inching closer. Charlie was a man forged by the land, rough hands caked with dirt, and a spirit as unwavering as the mountains in the distance. He had faced storms, droughts, and even the odd coyote, but never had he envisioned a night like this. As the figures closed in, they moved with an eerie silence, no laughter, no shouts, just the dark intent that can turn a heart cold. They were here to claim what wasn't theirs, to spread chaos in the tranquility he worked so hard to maintain. Suddenly, a sharp bark broke the stillness. Duke, Charlie's loyal border collie, bounded toward the strangers, fur bristling. The gang slowed, confusion flickering in their masked eyes at the sight of the dog, an unexpected defender of the ranch. Charlie shouted, barely masked exasperation breaking through his calm demeanor. But the moment hung heavy in the air, his heart racing as he realized they wouldn't back down easily. With the sun sinking lower, sinking further into twilight, Charlie turned to meet the encroaching threat. He yelled, his voice steady but the adrenaline coursing through him. One of the gang, a tall figure draped in black, stepped forward, their voice deep and condescending. "We're here for your livestock, old man." Charlie's heart sank, but his mind raced. This wasn't just about livestock, it was about preserving everything he'd built, everything he loved. The urge to fight surged through him. For a moment, fear gripped him. What could he possibly do against a gang armed and daring? Then a different thought flickered to life, igniting determination. He remembered stories told by his grandfather about clever farmers who outsmarted thieves, and that spark turned into a plan, a crazy but brilliant plan. He shouted back, voice trembling with anger. The gang hesitated, glancing at one another. Maybe they hadn't expected a confrontation. Maybe they thought they could intimidate him, intimidate someone who's grown strong in a world that has never been easy. "You should think again," Charlie continued, smirking ever so slightly, letting confidence seep into his words. With that statement, he took a step back, moving behind the barn where he kept an arsenal of defenses. It was a cornucopia of makeshift weapons he had stashed away over the years, clever traps and strategies that spoke of a resourcefulness bordering on genius. He grabbed the first flare gun, its bright red casing gleaming under the fading sun. "Come on out, Charlie," the tall leader shouted, retreating to bravado. Leaning against the barn, Charlie whistled sharply and Duke sprang back to his side. The blend of loyalty and instinct steeled his resolve. He could feel the wind shift dramatically, carrying tension like a storm cloud. "I'm not running anywhere," he called back. As the first flare shot into the air, a bright arc that split the dusk with fiery brilliance, the gang reeled back in surprise. The brilliant red signal cut through the waning light like a beacon. Someone chuckled nervously. Charlie grinned. Just then, from the corner of his eye, he spotted movement among the tall grass. His neighbors, alerted by the flare, had come as backup, armed with lanterns and farm tools of their own. A voice boomed from the sidelines, sending the gang into disarray. The arrival of the neighbors changed the calculus entirely. It shifted from a raid to a fight. "This isn't over," their leader spat, anxiety creeping into his tone. With panic in the air, they glanced around, weighing their options, realizing they were not just up against one determined farmer but a community ready to defend their own. Charlie watched as the masked figures began to scatter, the unity dissolving amid fear. He called after them, voice steady and unwavering. "This isn't just a ranch." With strategy kicking in, Charlie knew what to do next. He darted to the front of the barn, and there it stood, an old sack of feed. He hefted it and prepared to use it as bait, knowing that livestock were irresistibly curious. He'd throw it a short distance, just enough to lure them in. With a swift motion, he tossed the sack toward the far side of the ranch, a cloud of grain exploding into the air. Moments later, the masked figures, now aware of the commotion and confused by the distraction, turned in curiosity. He shouted, and his neighbors charged forward, toolbars gleaming, confidence bolstered by Charlie's clever ruse. The thud of footsteps increased. Visibility turned into chaos as the masked gang began stumbling over one another in the confusion. Just as Charlie had planned, they were drawn away from the barn and toward the refuge of the livestock, thinking they would seize the moment. Someone from his neighborhood shouted, lunging ahead. With a collective, unyielding roar, his neighbors hurled anything they could find: lassos, nets, even old worn shoes, as the gang spun around to face this unexpected ambush. The excitement surged. It transformed from dread to laughter, the thrill of unexpected teamwork electrifying the air. Another neighbor called, raising a pitchfork high. The scene had transformed into a hilarious yet gripping tableau. Realizing the game had turned, the gang looked at one another, uncertainty replaced by fear. All at once, the bravado deflated and they scrambled to retreat. Charlie stood at the forefront, a monumental symbol of resilience. "You chose the wrong ranch, my friends," he declared, a triumphant smile painting his face. One by one, the masked figures fled into the night, their plan unraveled by the tenacity of a community that would band together for what mattered. Charlie watched them disappear into the shadows, adrenaline fading as laughter and cheers erupted around him. One neighbor exclaimed, clapping Charlie on the back. Another added, shaking his head in disbelief. Charlie let out a deep belly laugh, eyes shining with gratitude as he soaked in the joy of camaraderie. "Don't thank me just yet," he said, scanning the yard full of his frightened but safe livestock. The adrenaline that had fueled his earlier bravado began to fade, replaced by the onset of exhaustion, but within him stirred a triumphant spirit. As night descended fully and stars blanketed the sky, Charlie gathered his neighbors around a bonfire, an impromptu celebration of victories small and large. Stories flowed as easily as the hot cocoa, laughter warming the night air, a testament to the strength found in unity. Charlie raised his cup, a hearty cheer echoing back at him. The evening unfolded into warmth, with the crickets serenading the newfound camaraderie, each chirp echoing the relentless spirit of a community built on resilience. As Charlie gazed across the flickering flames, the shadows of last night's fear dissipated. Strangers had become friends, and the bond forged here tonight would resonate forever in the spirit of Brookhaven Ranch. Defending his home hadn't just been about livestock. It was about legacy families, friendships, and the beautiful tapestry woven through hard work and determination. The gangs might come and go, but Charlie understood something deeper. There were battles that don't need violent confrontations, just a keen mind and a strong heart. With a content smile breaking across his face, Charlie leaned back, watching the stars twinkle in the night sky, feeling a sense of peace settle around him like a warm blanket. On an ordinary night, they had become extraordinary, rising against adversity, side by side forever guardians of Brookhaven Ranch. The peaceful evening at Cedar Hollow Ranch was shattered by an unnerving sound, the rustle of leaves, the scuff of boots pressing against dry earth. Under the dim glow of the setting sun, a group of shadowy figures crept from the tree line, their faces concealed by black masks that obscured their identity and intentions. They moved with purpose, each step calculated and silent, a stark contrast to the tranquil buzz of the evening. Inside the farmhouse, Matt, the rancher, was washing up after a long day spent working the land. He was a man of the earth, rugged and weathered, with sun-kissed skin that bore witness to countless days spent in the field. As he wiped his hands on a towel, a sudden flicker of instinct sent a chill racing down his spine. Something was off. The peaceful sounds of the evening had been swallowed by an eerie stillness. He paused, glancing out the kitchen window, and his heart dropped. There, silhouetted against the horizon, were the masked figures inching closer. They were no longer just an unsettling notion. They were a threat. He recognized them instantly. Stories of masked gangs plundering ranches had circulated in the community. But to see it unfolding on his own land made his blood run cold. Matt's mind raced. Panic was a luxury he couldn't afford now. It was time to pull from that wisdom, to protect everything he had built and cherished. With steady breaths, he stepped away from the window and moved quickly to the back of the house, where he kept his tools, his allies in this unexpected battle. Among them was an old but trusty flare gun. It had served as a sign of distress before. Tonight, it would serve a different purpose. But more than that, Matt had something even better, the element of surprise. Outside, the gang was drawing nearer, oblivious to the man preparing to stand against them. Their muttered conversations were laced with arrogance, underestimating the resolve they would soon have to face. With dark intentions swirling in their minds, they had decided tonight would be easy pickings. But they had not reckoned with the spirit of a determined farmer. Matt crept to the side of the barn, peering around the corner. The gang was now within shouting distance. Fear mingled with adrenaline as he raised the flare gun. This wasn't just a signal of distress. It was about to be a beacon of defiance. With a swift pull of the trigger, a brilliant flame shot into the sky, fizzling out in a spray of bright red. The gang stumbled back, startled, eyes wide. For a brief moment, confusion replaced their bravado, and Matt seized the opportunity. He yelled, voice carrying the weight of his years. The leader of the gang, a tall, imposing figure, took a step forward, brow furrowed. "What's the old man going to do? We've dealt with farmers before," he taunted. There it was, that flicker of doubt, the glimmer of arrogance that Matt could exploit. He had to act fast. This was more than just about the livestock. This was about his home, his legacy. He could feel the ground beneath him, the deeply rooted bond he had with every inch of this property. He ducked behind the barn, where he kept more than just tools. He had laid traps around the property in anticipation of intruders, always hoping he wouldn't need them. But tonight, destiny had other plans. From behind some barrels, he pulled out lengths of sturdy rope, and a net he had used for rounding up wayward sheep. He barely had time to rig the first trap before he heard the gang whispering among themselves, their confidence returning as they realized the rancher was alone. And alone he may have been in body but not in spirit. "Let's just take what we can and get out of here," one member of the gang sneered, pacing impatiently. Another replied, edging closer. Matt watched this unfold from his hiding spot, each moment feeling like an eternity. He knew he had to act. He quickly set the net between two sturdy fence posts that would capture any intruder who stumbled upon it. Then he took the rope and secured it to a nearby tree, ensuring it was taut enough to spring into action. With the trap set, he wasn't finished yet. He rushed to the back of the barn once more and grabbed a few empty feed sacks. With a deep breath, he lifted them and threw them across the path they were likely to take. Each bag fell with a short thud, ready to catch their attention. The masked gang, emboldened by their previous bravado, moved closer, their curiosity piqued by the rustling sacks. "What's the old man trying to do?" The leader laughed. Matt watched as they approached the bags, their focus shifting from the ranch itself to something peculiar at their feet. It was time for the next stage of his plan. He grabbed another flare, lighting it and aiming it at the ground near the bags. He yelled again, voice booming. The flare landed, illuminating the area with an eerie glow and adding urgency to the confusion. The leader turned, the confidence slowly fading from his expression. "Simple. You underestimated a farmer's knowledge of his land," Matt shouted back, adrenaline surging as he flicked a finger toward his traps. In that moment, the gang rushed blindly toward the sacks, exactly what he had anticipated. The first intruder stumbled, leg caught in the net that sprang to life, snaring him, leaving him tangled and desperate. "What the?" he yelled, thrashing around, further entangling himself. Matt seized the opportunity. Fueled by determination, he sprang into action. He shouted, calling for his loyal dog who had been observing from a safe distance. The border collie sprang forward, barking furiously, charging directly at the gang members. The sight startled them, and panic spread like wildfire. Two members of the gang, realizing they were in over their heads, turned to flee, but their escape was blocked by the flashing flares and the chaos unfolding. One masked figure, his mask slipping slightly, made a desperate attempt to escape left, only to trip over the rope that Matt had strategically placed just moments before. Down he went, falling into a small patch of mud that sent a spray of dirt flying everywhere. Matt couldn't help but smile. It was a scene straight out of a high-stakes cowboy movie. But this wasn't fiction, this was his life. He shouted, confidence renewed as he moved toward the remaining gang members who were still rooted in place, their resolve crumbling apart under the intensity of his defense. "You thought you could just come here and steal what isn't yours." "Exactly. You came expecting easy prey, but you forgot. A farmer's land is his heart." As Matt moved closer, the luminosity of the flares illuminated the determination behind his eyes, one that the gang couldn't replicate, no matter the bravado behind their masks. One by one, they turned to run, abandoning their comrade caught in the net, confusion spreading like a disease. The remaining masked figures lost their bravado, sprinting toward the tree line, shattered and terrified. The last escaped figure paused, looking back as if weighing his options. But the sight of his comrade helplessly caught in the net and Matt's fierce stance made the decision clear. He bolted into the darkness, lost to the forest. With the intruders gone, the adrenaline that had fueled Matt began to wane and exhaustion set in, as the sounds of the night began to reclaim the space around him. He took a deep breath. The air tasted sweeter now, filled with victory. "Easy, Duke, easy boy," he said, his voice softer as he knelt next to his dog who was panting but excited, tail wagging with pride. Matt went to his neighbor who was still struggling in the net, shaking his head in disbelief. He asked, reaching down to help him get free. "Yeah, I think so," the gang member coughed, realizing the futility of fighting against this farmer. There was a silent moment of understanding. Common men often underestimate the power of defense and conviction when home is on the line. "You might want to rethink your career choice," Matt chuckled lightly as he freed the man from the net. "Get back to your friends." With a nod of reluctant respect, the man scrambled to his feet, fleeing toward where his comrades had vanished, doubt etched on his face. As the night wore on, Matt took a moment to collect himself, the reality of what had just unfolded washing over him. The fear and anxiety that had gripped him were replaced by a sense of triumph. Amidst the landscape, he felt a wave of solidarity with his land and the history that thrummed in the ground beneath his feet. He stood a little taller, inexorably aware that he had defended his home, not just with weapons and traps, but with sheer willpower and quick thinking. "Let's check on the cattle," he said, turning to Duke, who followed loyally by his side. The night was quiet once more, but this time it felt safe. As he walked through the pastures, he knew fear would never again rule his heart. In his chest, the heart of a farmer beat fiercely, not just for the land, but for the unyielding spirit that drove him to protect it. Cedar Hollow Ranch wasn't merely property. It was a living testament to hard work, resilience, and an unwavering love for home. Tonight had changed him, reminded him of the lengths one would go when calling something home. As the fireflies danced around him, the stars twinkling like a great galaxy above, Matt felt the invigorating rush of life surge through him. The world outside would continue to spin, but this night belonged to him, a tale of courage, determination, and the indomitable spirit of a farm that would never be conquered. Dust hung heavy in the air, mingling with the scent of freshly tilled earth as the sun began its slow descent over the horizon. The fields of Wild Oak Ranch stretched out like a patchwork quilt, with golden grains swaying gently in the evening breeze. But within the peaceful landscape, an unfamiliar sound loomed, footsteps crunching over gravel, an insistent, marching rhythm that pierced the serene calm. At the edge of the property, just beyond the tree line, a group of masked figures appeared, shadowy silhouettes against the deepening blue of twilight. Their faces were hidden beneath dark cloths, but their intentions radiated an unmistakable menace. They crept closer, whispering among themselves, the tension simmering like the heat of the day now fading. Inside the cozy farmhouse, Jack, the ranch owner, stood by the window, wiping his hands on a rag after finishing chores. His heart quickened as he caught sight of the unexpected intruders. It was a sight that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. The tales of masked gangs looming in the nearby towns had always seemed distant, mere stories told around campfires. Now, the threat had manifested right on his land. Jack was a man grounded deeply in his roots, weathered hands showing signs of a hard life spent working the land. He had spent decades cultivating his ranch, each plant and animal representing a piece of his heart. But now that heart was pounding like a drum at a battle's edge. He had always prepared for storms, droughts, and the occasional coyote, but this, a band of thieves, was something entirely different. He was about to call for help, but then a flash of resolve crossed his face. The truth was, Jack had often found himself thinking of those words, especially when challenged. Steadying himself, he took a deep breath, the air feeling thick with tension, and he felt the weight of every decision he'd ever made. Quietly, he turned toward the back of the house, moving fast but careful not to make a sound. He reached for a rusty toolbox, the kind that had seen far better days. The tool held a history just like him. Inside, he had not only tools for repair but also a selection of items he had salvaged over the years, things that could become essential in this crisis. He grabbed a flare gun, knowing it would serve as both a warning and a distraction. Sliding the toolbox shut, he opened the back door with a gentle push, the hinges creaking softly. The sun was now dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in deep purples and oranges. That moment felt like the calm before a storm. But Jack wasn't going to allow a storm to break. He would be the one to weather it, to defend his land. Outside, the gang had made their way closer to the barn, their muttering voices thick with bravado as they tried to figure out the lay of the land. "This shouldn't take long," one of them laughed, the sound sharp and cutting through the air. But they had no idea what they were stepping into. Drawing closer, Jack aimed the flare gun toward the ground and fired it off with a loud pop. Bright red light shot into the fading sky, illuminating the area and causing the intruders to jerk their heads back in surprise. Confusion rippled through their ranks, and in that moment Jack seized the opportunity. He bellowed, his voice a thunderclap resonating through the evening air. The gang's leader, a tall figure with intimidating posture, stepped forward, a sneer plastered on his masked face. "You're alone out here, old man." Jack felt a flicker of anger, but behind it, a sharper clarity emerged. "I'm not alone. This land has always had my back." Enraged, the gang sprang into action, moving toward him with reckless abandon, emboldened by their numbers. But Jack wasn't just going to stand there and take it. He darted behind a pile of hay bales as they advanced, heart pounding but his mind racing with strategy. Jack had seen enough to know that people often underestimated the cleverness of a hardworking farmer. He quickly set to work, grabbing lengths of rope and securing them to the hay bales, creating a barrier that could slow down the masked intruders. The gang was closing in, but just as they reached the edge of the bales, he pulled the second flare from his toolbox, lighting it and tossing it toward them. The flare ignited immediately, the bright orange light bursting forth like a fireball, illuminating the night. He yelled, letting the fear in his heart morph into drive as chaotic laughter erupted from his throat. The disruption caught the gang off guard. They stumbled, momentarily disoriented by the sudden brilliance. One of the masked men screamed, but it was too late. The trap had been set and the fear transformed into panic, a panic Jack could sense like an electric current in the air. "This already looks like a bad idea," the leader spat, eyes darting from Jack to the glowing flare. He waved his hands as the chaos escalated, trying to regain control among his companions. With everything happening at once, two members of the gang, in a desperate attempt to escape, made a break for the far side of the barn but were met with the rope trap Jack had laid out. They stumbled, crashing into the ground with a thud, their curses echoing in the night. Jack called out, a smirk creeping into view. He could feel the laughter inside him rising, even amidst the threat that loomed large. Now, with two of the gang members incapacitated, the others hesitated, unsure of what to do next. Jack knew he had them on the ropes literally. Stepping out from behind the bales, he took a commanding stance, flare in one hand and a pitchfork in the other. "I suggest you leave now and never come back." Jack's voice rang like a call to arms. The leader's bravado flickered as he realized his men were caught. This wasn't the easy swindle they had imagined. "Let's go, boys," he shouted, even as doubt clouded his eyes. Without waiting for further instruction, the remaining gang members dashed back toward the woodlands, leaving their comrades behind. They vanished into the shadows, leaving only the sounds of their heavy footfalls in the swaying trees. Jack chuckled to himself, standing tall in his yard, the flare still blazing like a beacon. He called after them, feeling an overwhelming rush of triumph pump through his veins. Turning his attention back to the two members caught in his trap, Jack approached them cautiously. "Looks like you miscalculated," he said, a mix of mockery and seriousness in his tone. The two men struggled against the ropes, panting heavily but ultimately realizing they needed to play it smart. "We didn't mean any harm." One of them mumbled, eyes darting away, shame creeping over him. "Quick scores don't end well, boys." Jack's tone shifted, resolve solidifying as he pulled out his phone. This wasn't just about defending his land, it was about community. Dialing the local sheriff, he made the call that would bring in backup, reinforcing the bonds forged in adversity. "You'll want to come take a look at the situation on Wild Oak," he said as he watched the two men squirm in their bonds. Once he hung up, Jack looked at them thoughtfully. "You know, if you wanted to work for a living, you could have come by and asked. I'm always looking for an extra set of hands around here, but now..." They exchanged glances, fear creeping back into their eyes. The second gang member stammered, "First, you'll apologize for trespassing. Then you'll help me clean up this mess. I'm not cruel, just firm in my ways." The men exchanged uncertain glances, clearly baffled. Jack remembered being young and reckless himself once, and it dawned on him that sometimes tough love was needed. "Choose wisely, gents." With the sheriff on the way and the gleam of possibility glinting in their eyes, the gang members reluctantly agreed to his offer. "We'll help," the first one said, his voice shaky but firm. "Good. Let's get started then," Jack replied, hope rekindling in his heart. While they worked together under the glow of the fading flare, the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the yard. What began as an invasion evolved into an unexpected partnership, building a foundation from folly. Jack found himself sharing snippets of his life, the joys and struggles of being a rancher. Slowly, the walls of the past began to dissolve. By the time the sheriff arrived, the trio was knee-deep in work, the once tense atmosphere replaced by a shared sense of purpose. Jack stood tall, relaying the events of the night with a satisfied grin. "Well, it seems you've turned things around, Mr. Jack," the sheriff chuckled, shaking his head. Jack nodded, heart full, the experience everlasting. "This land taught me a lesson tonight." As the sheriff took the two gang members into custody, his voice was steady, but his eyes softened. As they drove away, Jack looked over his shoulder, knowing that perhaps this encounter had changed them all. It would forever linger like a ghost in the deep recesses of their minds, a reminder of decisions made and new paths forged. As the stars twinkled into view overhead, a soft breeze rustled through the grass, carrying whispers of resilience on the wind. Jack leaned against his barn, arms crossed, the tension of the evening dissolving into tranquility. The weight of the world had lifted, revealing a brighter horizon. In that moment, he understood what it meant to protect not just land, but heart, spirit, and legacy. The ranch thrived, and so did its caretaker. With every challenge, there was an opportunity. Tonight had been a testament to something deeper than fear. It was a celebration of community, of second chances, and above all, the unwavering spirit of a farmer ready to defend what truly mattered. As night fell on Wild Oak Ranch, Jack felt a renewed sense of purpose, ready to greet whatever dawns awaited. The sun hung low over the rustling fields of Blue Ridge Ranch, casting a golden glow on the corn stalks swaying gently in the wind. It was a serene evening, the kind that wrapped around you like a warm embrace. But beneath this peaceful facade, danger lurked just beyond the horizon, unseen yet palpable. A faint crunch echoed in the distance, echoing like a drumbeat. The sound grew louder, cutting through the tranquility. From the tree line emerged a group of shadowy figures clad in black, their bodies moving in unison as if choreographed. Their faces were obscured by masks, giving them an air of menace that sent a chill down the spine of every creature on the ranch. Inside the farmhouse, Ben, the ranch owner, wiped sweat from his brow as he stepped away from the kitchen sink. A hard-working man in his 40s, he had carved out a life filled with sweat and grit. He loved this land with its rolling hills and open skies. It was his heart, soul, and sanctuary. But as he peeked through the window, Ben's heart sank. He watched in disbelief as the masked gang approached his livestock pens. They were whispering among themselves, their hushed tones laced with confidence and arrogance. They believed they were unstoppable, that they could take from this hardworking man without consequence. But what they didn't realize was that Ben had lived through storms and droughts, and he was not about to let anyone take what was his. A pulse of adrenaline surged through him, quickening his breath. He recalled the stories his father told him about outsmarting thieves who preyed on farmers' stories filled with crafty traps and clever tactics. As he turned away from the window, a familiar fire ignited within him. It was time to protect his home, to fight back. Quietly, Ben slipped into the back room where he kept a stash of odds and ends things that might just come in handy. His hands grazed the cool metal of an old flare gun, a relic from his younger days, used for signaling distress when storms rolled in. He grasped it tightly, a plan brewing in his mind. Tonight, it would serve a different purpose. Stepping out through the back door, the cool evening air hit him like a refreshing wave. He could see the gang's figures now, closer than ever, their chatter eerily upbeat. They thought the ranch was easy pickings, devoid of defenses or spirit. But that was the first mistake they would pay for tonight. With steady hands, he loaded the flare gun, aiming it skyward. The bright light erupted with a thunderous bang, cutting through the night like a beacon. The gang froze, their bravado faltering. One of them shouted, eyes wide as they shielded themselves from the sudden glare. Ben shouted, a mix of authority and defiance in his voice. The leader stepped forward, confidence returning as he chuckled. "You think that flare is going to scare us? We're here for your livestock, old man." Ben felt the heat of anger rise within him. He roared, pushing the fear aside. With plans swirling in his mind, Ben dashed toward the barn. He knew it better than anyone. He quickly set up traps, a skill honed from years of working the fields. He grabbed lengths of belt rope, haphazardly tying them between sturdy posts, expertly crafting a tripwire that would ensnare anyone foolish enough to charge forward. When he finished, he stepped back, adrenaline coursing through his veins. The gang was beginning to recover from the flare's blinding light, moving cautiously toward the barn, and he knew he had only moments before they would reach him. Just then, Jack, his loyal old retriever, barked from behind him, its sharp yelps echoing off the barn walls. Ben felt a swell of pride. He wasn't alone in this fight. "Stay close, Jack," he urged, heart racing. With the gang closing in, Ben had to act fast. He reached for a handful of small rocks and tossed them toward the opposite side of the barn. The clattering sound drew the gang's attention, and they turned, their curiosity piqued. One of them said, a frown creasing his brow. "Must be nothing," the leader replied, but doubt flickered in his eyes as Ben prepared to unleash his next surprise. Seizing the moment, Ben lit another flare and hurled it at their feet. The explosion of color illuminated their faces, expressions shifting from arrogance to confusion. They stumbled back, eyes darting around as they sought to regain their footing. Ben shouted, lunging for the tripwire he had set. As the gang members surged forward, not realizing what lay ahead, they tripped over the rope, sending them sprawling into each other like bowling pins. Ben could hardly contain his laughter. He exclaimed, invigorated by the sight of their chaos. In the confusion, Jack barked with excitement, and Ben wasn't about to let this golden opportunity slip through his fingers. He dove into action, charging at them with the flare gun raised like a warrior. "You thought you could conquer this ranch." The leader was scrambling to regain some semblance of authority. "Get up!" He shouted at his gang, but the panic had seeped into their ranks, the veneer of bravado cracking under the pressure. Ben saw his chance to drive them away. He pointed back at the cattle that were now stirring nervously. Jack barked again, his tail wagging, a fierce protector at Ben's side. The gang hesitated, uncertainty swirling as Ben's fierce presence loomed large in the twilight. Emboldened by the unexpected turn of events, the less experienced members began to shove each other back, mumbling in fear. Ben seized the moment. He declared, reinforcing his position. At that moment, the tide shifted. The leader glanced nervously at his crew, seeing fear reflected in their eyes. "We should go," he muttered, finally losing the confidence that had fueled their earlier arrogance. Ben shouted, feeling a rush of triumph swell within him. The masked gang turned and fled, stumbling into one another as they rushed away into the darkness from which they had come. When he was sure they were gone, Ben sank to a nearby hay bale, heart still racing, a mixture of elation and exhaustion coursing through him. Jack moved closer, leaning against him, providing a comforting presence. "We did it, boy." As the last echoes of panic faded into silence, Ben marveled at the unexpected power he had felt, driven not only by the need to defend his land, but by the spirit of hope and resilience. He had turned fear into strength, a lesson forever etched into that night's unfolding. In the days that followed, he inspected his traps and repaired the minor damage done in the skirmish. News of the masked gang spread like wildfire through the neighboring community, tales relatively exaggerated but imbued with praise for Ben's bravery and cleverness. Visitors began to roll in, friends, neighbors, fellow farmers offering their support. They shared their own stories of struggles and victories, bonding over the universal themes of loss and triumph. It felt like a new chapter. The ranch had transformed from a serene sanctuary into a symbol of resilience. One afternoon, as he tended to the livestock under a sunlit sky, Ben found his mind wandering back to that night. What had begun with a sense of impending doom had evolved into a defining moment of unity, courage, and community spirit. This land had always connected him to the greater tapestry of life, but it felt even richer now. His phone buzzed in his pocket, breaking his reverie. It was a text from a neighbor, inviting him to a community gathering one centered around rebuilding after turmoil. Immediately, Ben smiled. This time it wasn't just about himself. It was about sharing the strength born from adversity. With Jack trotting by his side, Ben set off toward the gathering, his heart full. The sun dipped low again, but this time it brought with it a sense of excitement rather than fear. As he walked, he cast a glance back at the ranch, a deep appreciation swelling within him. "No mask, no gang can ever take away what we've built here," he whispered to the wind. Through his defiance and the collective spirit of those around him, he had forged a new legacy. The laughter and warmth of community filled him with hope and strength. The challenges of tomorrow would come, not with threats and fear, but in unity and shared purpose. And as he stepped forward into the embrace of those who shared his passion for the land, he knew one thing for certain: no matter what came his way, he was ready. Together, they would weather the storms and rise from the ashes stronger than ever, embodying the very spirit that had guided him that fateful night. It was a journey not just of survival, but of thriving against all odds. The orange glow of dusk enveloped the sprawling fields of Redwood Ranch, painting the sky in hues so vibrant they seemed almost otherworldly. Birds chirped their evening serenade as the sun sank slowly beyond the horizon, every note a reminder of the peace the land held. But for Sam, the farmer, this tranquility felt like a thin veil hiding impending chaos. From his post near the barn, he caught a flicker of movement, dark shapes weaving through the shadowy fringe of trees bordering his property. At first, he thought it was a trick of the fading light, but as he squinted, his stomach dropped. A gang of masked figures was emerging, their intentions written all over their menacing postures. They approached like vultures drawn to the scent of vulnerability, an ominous band of marauders seeking to disrupt the sanctuary he had fought so hard to build. Panic surged like wildfire in his chest, a visceral reaction that came with being a protector, a guardian of everything he held dear. Sam had faced storms and droughts before, but this was different. This was a threat that brought with it the kind of fear only born from the unexpected, the kind that could steal away your dreams overnight. But he wasn't about to let that happen. With a deep breath, he steeled himself. Years spent working the land had made him resourceful, and he had a plan crafted from desperation and experience. He turned on his heel and dashed toward the barn, heart pounding like a war drum echoing through his chest. Inside the barn, the scent of hay and earth filled his lungs. He moved swiftly but deliberately, gathering supplies, a sturdy rope, a couple of old tarps, and a few tools. His mind raced through possibilities, mapping out strategies like a seasoned general preparing for battle. He needed to outsmart these intruders, but first, he had to buy himself some time. Outside, the masked gang laughed wickedly, their confidence palpable. They strutted across his land as though they owned it already. They whispered among themselves, deciding on their course of action, and Sam could hear their taunts mingling with the sound of rustling leaves. "Let's grab whatever we can and get out of here," one of them sneered, a playfulness in his tone. Their laughter rang in Sam's ears like an alarm bell, motivating him to move faster. He had to act, and he had to act now. With a deep breath, he stepped outside, holding a flare gun he had managed to acquire over the years. He aimed it into the sky, the darkness around making the small tool feel like a mighty weapon. He pulled the trigger, and with a loud pop, the flare shot upward, bursting into a brilliant shower of red. Sam called out, his voice carrying power he didn't quite feel, but he knew he had to sound strong, he had to assert dominance. Startled, the gang turned their heads, confusion etched on their features. One of them laughed, their bravado faltering just for a moment. Sam seized that heartbeat of hesitation, his heart racing. He shouted, his voice rough and resolute. In that instant, he grabbed the rope, ready to set his traps. He knew the barn like the back of his hand. It was his home. If he was quick enough, he could use the very landscape he had cultivated against them. He sprinted toward the nearest fence, looping the rope around posts with skill, creating a sturdy obstacle. Turning around, he pulled down a couple of old tarps he had used for covering equipment in rainstorms, laying them out strategically near the approach to the barn. He knew the gang would charge in, thinking they could seize the livestock without consequence. But Sam had something they didn't: knowledge of his land. With the trap set, he glanced back at the gang, their laughter growing more menacing. They were approaching the barn, urgency fueling their desires. "Let's grab those cows, man." The leader's voice rang out, laced with greed. Sam positioned himself behind a stack of bales, waiting for just the right moment. He could hear their footsteps crunching closer, and for a moment he felt fear trying to creep in. But then he recalled everything he had sacrificed for this land: the blood, sweat, and tears. He was ready to confront the darkness growing on his doorstep. He shouted, leaping out from his hiding place. Startled, the gang froze in shock as Sam hurled one of the tarps over the nearest intruder, ensnaring him. The gang's expressions morphed from laughter to disbelief, but Sam wasn't done yet. All those years of working the land had prepared him for this moment. He hollered at his loyal dog, who had been lying nearby, sensing the shift in atmosphere. Jack sprang into action, barking loudly, charging at the intruders with bravado. The sight seemed to present a new layer of chaos, confusion spreading among the gang members. One shouted, but their systems were crumbling. Sam leaped forward, kicking up dust as he moved with the agility of someone who had been working the fields all day. He had one more trap to set a makeshift blockade with the remaining bales. The gang scrambled, trying to regain control, but the distraction had thrown them completely off. As the leader shouted orders, Sam lunged forward, using the flare gun like a torch. "You think you can steal from me?" Suddenly, one of the gang members lost his footing and tripped over the rope he hadn't seen coming, crashing into another. They fell in a heap, causing a chain reaction that sent more of their crew tumbling. The scene was chaotic, a swirl of panic and uncertainty as Sam reveled in his small victory. He barked, his eyes gleaming with determination. Uncertainty danced in the air, and the masked gang hesitated, grappling with the sudden shift of power. As Sam brandished the flare gun, he felt a rush of adrenaline surging through him. The idea of someone taking what was his ignited a flame within him that no one could extinguish. They turned to flee, scrambling back the way they had come, but not before Sam made a final push. He shouted, watching as they retreated into the shadows, panting and bewildered by the chaos they had just faced. As silence settled over the yard, Sam felt the weight of the world lift from his shoulders. Jack trotted back to his side, eyes bright with pride as they surveyed the scene. It was chaotic, but victory pulsed through Sam's veins like the rhythm of the land he had worked so hard to protect. But there was no time to rest. He hurried over to the gang member he had ensnared in the tarp, who was still flailing on the ground, half laughing, half crying. The young man pleaded, adrenaline still buzzing through his voice. "This isn't our first skirmish, you know. You should have picked a different target. I don't take kindly to thieves," Sam said, kneeling to look the kid squarely in the eyes. "What were you thinking?" The young man paused, the bravado fading. "We were just trying to get by. It's tough out there," he mumbled, eyes cast down. Sam saw a flicker of vulnerability in him, something he recognized from his own youth. "I get it. It's hard. But there's always a better way. Ask first." As anger dissolved into understanding, he gently released the young man from the tarp. "Get out of here, and for your sake, learn from this." The kid nodded slowly, scrambling back to his feet. "Thanks, man," he said, a mix of relief and shame flooding his features. He ran off into the night, yelling for his comrades. As the adrenaline faded, Sam looked around his ranch, realizing he had narrowly escaped a terrible situation. In the quiet reflection following the chaos, he appreciated the serenity that surrounded him even more. The sky was a canvas of stars, twinkling brightly, a reminder that some threats could be thwarted with courage and strategy. In the days that followed, the heaviness of the incident lingered in the air. Word began to spread through the small town nearby, stories morphing into exaggerated accounts of bravery and nearly mythical escape. Neighbors showed up at his door, intrigued and wanting to lend support to a community united by mutual respect for the land they all shared. Each evening brought new faces, eager to share tales over home-cooked meals, reliving the drama of the masked gang's untimely demise at the hands of a farmer. And as friendships blossomed amidst shared laughter, Sam realized that he had turned a moment of fear into a spark of community spirit. Soon, people were coming together to repair fences, cultivate fields, and support one another in ways he had never imagined. Sam was not just protecting his land, he was protecting a way of life. That gang, without knowing, had helped forge a stronger bond among neighbors, breathing life into what had felt like a lonely existence. One warm evening, as laughter echoed against the backdrop of the ranch, Sam looked at Jack lying peacefully at his feet. The memory of the encounter with the gang still loomed in the back of his mind, but now it was a reminder of resilience, of unexpected friendships formed amidst chaos. "Let's go for a stroll, buddy," he said, beckoning to Jack. They wandered through the fields under a dome of stars, marveling at how things had shifted in such a short span. The ranch thrived once more, its heart beating strong as ever. He felt the wind brush gently against his face, whispering secrets of the land that had always been his ally. He had fought for this, and in the process, he discovered not just the strength he possessed but the power of community that arose from shared hardships. As he walked on, knowing they had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, he didn't just see land. He saw legacy, story, and most importantly, home. Nothing was ever truly safe, but he would always be ready to defend what mattered most. With Jack by his side, he embraced every new dawn with courage, for he had learned that the essence of a true farmer wasn't just in sowing seeds, but in growing resilience. The sun had slipped below the horizon, casting long, wavering shadows across the fields of Elmwood Ranch. A steady breeze whispered through the tall stalks of corn, carrying the sweet scent of earth and life. But in that serene moment, something was brewing on the edge of the property, an unsettling presence that weighed heavy in the air. Jacob, the ranch owner, sat on the porch, his weathered hands resting on the wooden railing, his gaze lost in the beauty of dusk. He was a man of the land, forged by years of hard work under the sun, built like the sturdy oak trees lining his fields. But tonight, there was an instinct gnawing at the back of his mind, a primal warning that turned his blood cold. Suddenly, a sharp rustle in the nearby trees broke through his reverie. He turned his head sharply. 5 figures emerged, their movements stealthy and deliberate. They wore masks that concealed their identities. Only the glint of their eyes revealed their intent. Jacob's heart raced. Memories of local rumors about masked gangs targeting farms surged in his mind like a tidal wave. It was happening. It was happening right here, right now. He swallowed hard, adrenaline coursing through him. They were coming for his livestock. The fear that surged through his chest was quickly subsumed by a fire, a fierce resolve he had inherited from generations of farmers before him. This was his land, his legacy, and he would fight for it. In the nearby barn, Jacob moved swiftly. His hands trembled slightly as he opened the shed, revealing an arsenal of tools, shovels, ropes, even old nets. Each item, a potential weapon or trap. He grabbed a few essentials: rope, a fishing net used for the ponds, and an old flare gun his father had left behind. The gang's laughter twisted through the air, taunting and brimming with bravado. Jacob clenched his jaw. No more hesitating. He had to move quickly. He slipped behind the barn, heart pounding, and began to set his traps. The gang reached the penned area where his livestock rested, blissfully unaware of the impending danger. They stood there exchanging triumphant looks, one of them already casually throwing a rope over the nearest animal. "Grab that cow," one shouted, a cruel grin stretching across his face. Jacob's grip tightened around the net as he finished tying off the rope around a nearby post, crafting a clever trip line that would ensnare anyone who dared rush at him. He crept forward, sharp breaths mingling with the scent of hay, listening intently. They were so close now, laughter and bravado swirling dangerously in the night. One of the intruders suddenly said, eyes narrowing. Jacob froze, his heart racing like a runaway train. Before he could react, someone shouted, "It's just an old farm." The gang surged forward, eager for their bounty. Jacob knew he had only moments to prepare. With a swift motion, he lunged from his hiding spot, flare gun raised, aiming skyward. A blast of red exploded into the darkening sky, lighting up the scene like daylight for just a heartbeat. Jacob roared, his voice deep and commanding. The gang froze, caught off guard by the sudden illumination. Confusion washed over their masked faces. The laughter died in an instant. Shouted the leader, a tall, lanky figure with a look of disbelief. Seizing the moment, Jacob swung the flare gun in their direction, small flames flickering at the edges of his nerves. "You think you can take what's mine?" He stepped forward, drawing on his years of experience. Any farmer worth their salt knows how to defend what they love. But they weren't backing down. As they regrouped, their shock morphed into anger and disbelief. The leader howled, shoving one of his comrades forward. Jacob watched as they gathered themselves, and without a second thought, he hurled the fishing net forward, its weight soaring through the air. It landed squarely over the second member of the gang, ensnaring him in an instant. Jacob shouted, adrenaline surging. The figure thrashed helplessly, the gang's confidence shattering like glass. Turning back to the leader, Jacob knew he only had one option now. He had to intimidate them further. Grabbing another flare from his pocket, he lit it and tossed it towards the ground, the flames igniting just short of where they stood. One of them yelled, the bravado fading, replaced by genuine fear. Jacob warned, brandishing the gun again, channeling every ounce of determination from his heart into his voice. The leader's composure frayed, his bravado slipping. The remaining gang members looked at each other warily, uncertain about their next move. With one of their own trapped and the other fiery chaos erupting around them, murderous intent had turned to sheer panic. In a last-ditch effort, the leader turned and dashed, instinct taking over, followed quickly by the rest of the gang. They ran, stumbling over each other as they fled back toward the trees, afraid of the determined farmer who had thwarted their plans. As Jacob watched them disappear into the darkness, a wave of relief washed over him. He took a deep breath, the adrenaline slowly ebbing away. He was still standing, but just as he felt that shaky sense of victory, he heard a sudden noise coming from the shadows, rustling leaves, footfalls. He cautiously turned, flare gun still held high. He called, voice steady but laced with weariness. The rustling grew louder and his heart dropped. Suddenly, a figure emerged, not one of the masked gang, but rather a woman breathing heavily, her clothes torn and dirty. Help! Jacob's mind raced. Was this a trap? Did the gang send someone back to distract him? He couldn't let his guard down now, but the desperation in her eyes was palpable. He barked, the flare gun still poised for action. I'm Sarah. I was held captive in their hideout. She gasped, glancing back into the blackness behind her, pure terror etched in her features. Jacob's mind whirled. Did he trust her? It was a risk, but this was an opportunity. If they were organized enough to have a hostage, it meant they wouldn't just vanish into the night. They would regroup, plan their next move, and maybe come back even stronger. Time was short. He commanded urgently. Jacob ducked his head, scanning the brush nearby for signs of danger. The night air was thick with unease as he ushered her inside. Once inside, he stepped into the shadows, moving to ensure the door was barricaded. You need to tell me everything you know about them, Jacob said firmly, his heart racing again as adrenaline surged through him. She nodded rapidly, her fear mixing with the lingering adrenaline. They have a hideout not far from here. I overheard them talking. There's more of them. A tumultuous storm brewed inside Jacob as he processed her words. He pressed, leaning forward, urgency filtering through his veins. 5 or 6, maybe more, she stammered. As the words left her lips, a new fear settled in Jacob's gut. They hadn't just come for a few cows. This was about striking fear into the heart of the rancher. Their plan was as sinister as it was clear. I'll set the traps again, he murmured, piecing together a frantic plan. Use the land against them, but we need to act fast. Jacob paced the barn, adrenaline flooding his system once more as he imagined what could happen if he lost this fight. The stakes had risen dramatically. It wasn't just his own home anymore. He had a life at risk, now Sarah's life. As he gathered supplies once more, Jacob looked back at her, heart pounding. Yes, she said firmly, wide eyes resolute. Just then the distant sound of voices pierced the night air and Jacob's stomach dropped. They're here, he whispered, urgency lacing his words. He quickly stacked bales of hay, creating a makeshift barrier at the door. As footsteps drew nearer and laughter filled the air, Jacob knew they had to become the predator instead of the prey. The thrill surged, melding with fear but igniting courage deeper in his veins. They'll expect us to be frightened, he said. That's our advantage. Using quick motions, they set up traps throughout the barn, stretching rope taut and laying nets near the exit. Each movement felt like a rhythm, an unbroken dance of survival orchestrated under the dim light of evening. Suddenly, the door rattled, a heavy pound echoing through the wood. The leader's voice boomed, dripping with menace. Jacob glanced at Sarah, who nodded, determination pulsating in her eyes. He held the flare gun close to his chest, ready to defend their home. "Let's give them a show," he whispered. The pounding intensified and the door creaked under pressure. Jacob positioned himself behind the hay bales, flare gun aimed, every sense heightened as the gang pressed closer. The door flew open violently and the leader shouted, "Get in there." They stormed into the barn, their faces masked, but Jacob felt the surge of adrenaline course through him, igniting every fiber of his being. He yelled, and as chaos erupted, the trap sprang into action. One of the gang members stumbled into the net, yelping as he became ensnared. The leader's eyes widened in disbelief as the scene unfolded. He shouted, his bravado fading. As the gang members flailed, panic erupted, and Jacob fired the flare gun into the air once more, a fiery burst cutting through the confusion. But just as Jacob began to press forward, ready to solidify their edge, he suddenly heard a sharp gasp from Sarah. She screamed. The moment stretched thin, and Jacob turned just in time to see another masked figure aiming a weapon straight at him. The flicker of recognition brought with it dread, but he knew he had to act fast. In one swift motion, he dropped the flare gun and lunged toward the figure, desperate to protect not just himself but Sarah too. And that's when everything shattered into chaos. He felt the impact before he saw it, a sudden explosion of noise and bright light blasting through the barn as the air thickened with dust and confusion. Gasps echoed, and Jacob fought against the pandemonium swirling around him, the last thing he heard before everything went dark. "Watch out." In that moment, the world around him faded into nothingness, the weight of the fight collapsing around. Just when it seemed the unyielding darkness would swallow him whole, a flicker of hope ignited in the distance, a faint glimmer of possible survival, of triumph against all odds. But where would it lead? And would they emerge from the darkness again? In the heart of danger, with fate now hanging in the balance, the story of Jacob and Sarah was far from over.